The purpose of this presentation is to examine mythology and the gods of the ancient world from a biblical perspective. All images, video, and audio clips contained in this video are presented for critical examination and educational purposes only.
Zeus, Surya, Thor. For thousands of years, ancient myths have described gods who came down from the heavens.
Always you have someone who is descending from the sky with loud noise, with thundering, with fire, with smoke.
They would have come from the most powerful and magical place possible, from the stars.
But just who were these mystical beings that ruled the skies with supernatural powers?
You could wonder if these tales of Zeus's thunderbolts, Thor's hammer, if these weren't real weapons.
Did our ancient ancestors create the gods from their own imaginations? Or did they simply report events they believed to be true?
Our ancestors misinterpreted extraterrestrials as gods because that was the only way that they could explain away what they witnessed.
Millions of people around the world believe we have been visited in the past by extraterrestrial beings. What if it were true? Did ancient aliens really help to shape our history? And were the gods of our ancestors actually visitors from other worlds?
Welcome. Today we're going to be talking about mythology and the coming great deception.
Now, maybe like me, you like going to the movies or renting movies, watching them on TV or whatever. Lately, I would say within the last, at least for the last year, we've started to see a lot of common themes showing up in movies. And I'll go ahead and ask, what do you think these three movies have in common?
Lots of special effects.
Definitely a lot of special effects.
New Age.
Concepts. Mm-hmm. All three of these movies actually depict superhuman hybrid saving the world. In the first movie there, they mix DNA and everything with an alien species and create a human-alien hybrid. And in the last two, it's the son of a god, little g. Son of Zeus in the first one there, and son of Poseidon in the second movie there. The son of God saves the world. Problem is, it's the wrong son of the wrong god. There's a book by a guy by the name of Dr. Ken Johnson. He wrote this book called Ancient Post-Flood History, and he gives a very interesting take on one of the theories of how the gods of the ancient world sort of came to be. And he makes note of the ages of a lot of the people spoken about in the Bible. And he says, Noah and his sons lived to be about 600 years old, right? The next generation lived to about 400 to 500 years. By the time you get to Abraham's generation or so, they were only living to be about 200 years. And by the time you get to Moses, and today, we're kind of capped out at 80 to 120. So after the flood, lifespan began to dramatically drop off. Before the flood, people lived 969 years, Methuselah. I believe Adam was about 930 years or so. Everybody's living right around the 900 time frame. And what this guy says, he says, imagine, let's say this generation here shows up. And as that generation gets old, is about to die, their lifespan's only about 200 years. But the generation before them is living almost twice that. And so here they are on their deathbed, and they're looking at their parents, who they know have been around probably for 100 or more years before they showed up. And they still look healthy and young and look like they could go on for a little while longer. So he speculates that generation probably would look at their parents as immortals. And their parents' parents, who are still around and have lived for a long time, possibly to be gods. And it's one way you could think, I could see that might be a possible way people started to view other people as gods. As we look at the scriptures, we'll see that great men of renown existed. Some have accused me probably of being a euhemerist.
Essentially, a euhemerist adheres to the theory of attributing the origin of the gods of the ancient world to the deification of historical heroes. Euhemerism is named after that individual there, Euhemerus, around 300 BC or so, Greek philosopher. Clement of Alexandria, sort of an apologetics type person for Christianity, said to those, he's talking about the gods and the various people who worship them, he said, "Those to whom you bow were once men like yourselves." So clearly it seems like he also adhered to the same theory. This is where I see the beginning of the Great Deception. Everybody know what I'm talking about when I say the coming Great Deception? Scriptures talks about there's going to be a deception that's going to be so great that even the elect could be deceived. I believe that actually started all the way back in the garden. The coming Great Deception. With this passage here, Genesis chapter 3, "The serpent said unto the woman, Ye shall not surely die, for God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil." What you see there is the devil making a few promises, essentially. Promise of immortality. You know, the devil's the father of lies. They already had that. They're in the garden, created perfectly. Death didn't exist at that point. They were already immortal. Illumination, their eyes will be open. They'll have greater understanding. Well, Adam walked with God in the garden. How much more understanding and illumination do you need? Hey, God, how'd that happen? Well, let me tell you, Adam. Right? You shall become like gods. 3 big promises of the devil. Those 3 are very much still in existence today. People on a quest for immortality, illumination, and godlikeness. In fact, right here in downtown Dallas, there's a building called the Crescent Building. Anybody familiar with the Crescent Building? It's a very interesting building. I had to go there to interview some wealthy people, major donors of the ministry that we're a part of. And when I was in the building, I started looking around, and there's 3 major entrances to the building, and each of the entrances has a really big painting, like the size of this wall, in the entrance. This is one of the paintings. These paintings, I was taking pictures of them because I was blown away by them. And as I'm taking pictures, somebody showed up out of nowhere. Apparently the eye in the sky somewhere saw me, and this gentleman politely escorted me out of the building. And I am an artist. I'm a painter and sculptor. And so he was asking me what I was doing. I said, I was just very interested in these paintings. And I was asking him, were they bought or where did they get them or whatever. And then they said that these paintings were specifically commissioned by the Hunt family for that building in 1998. Let me read the description. There was a plaque that was right next to this painting describing what it represents, what it means. It says, "It is significant that in Mariani's iconography," Mariani's, of course, the painter, "the protagonists and heroes are all artists and creators. His idealized Olympian figures are conventions of neoclassical art and understood to be demigods. Symbolically, they are harbingers of realities beyond the familiar and mundane realities of the daily world. Mariani's poets are symbolized by their crowns of laurel leaves, and the tortoise is considered to be, get this, the mediator between heaven and earth." Does that sound familiar? Anybody remember that phrase from the Scriptures? Who's the mediator between heaven and earth? The man Christ Jesus, right? Yeshua. Since it lives to be the tortoise, since it lives to be of a great age, it is also a symbol of immortality. Not far from that painting was another one. There's an awful lot of imagery here. It would take a half a day just to describe everything that's in that painting. Suffice it to say, it's mostly demonic, full of Nephilim hybrid creatures, very disturbing picture. Has all sorts of occult symbols and stuff, and owls and all sorts of things dealing with secret societies and all that. All of their favorite symbols are embedded in this painting. Very large painting. In Mariani's art, the artist, which is this guy here, you can kind of see he's wearing a little mask right there pointing down. The artist, like the mythological hero Sisyphus, who was so admired by the Romantics, has robbed the flame of life from the gods, anointing himself in the role as the supreme creator in and of our culture. This is a major financial institution here in downtown Dallas.
That's where a lot of the wealth of this city is located. These paintings are declaring what their intentions and motives and all sorts of other things probably are going on there. And as I was looking at that picture and making notes, this woman walked by and she says, "I hate that picture. I hope you're here to get rid of it," and walked past me. It's apparently somebody who worked there. All right? Right here in downtown Dallas. And these guys are declaring themselves to be supreme creators. But what does the Torah tell us? The Ten Commandments, right? What does that say? Thou shalt have no other gods before me. I think I've always just kind of passed over that. You know, I understand it, but I didn't really give it a lot of thought till recently. Who are these other gods, and why is God so concerned about them? Really started to think about it, so started doing some research, and I came across a book by a guy by the name of King Wells. It's called Ancient Myths and the Bible. It's a very short book, large print, easy to read. But he makes some very profound and interesting statements in this book. He says, "I believe the Bible to be the inerrant Word of God, and therefore we have to believe that much of what we call myth cannot be fiction or a lie. Many of the themes that exist in ancient mythology exist in the Scriptures." And he's right. You know, we're taught about Greek mythology and all that stuff in school, and we just kind of write it off as, you know, fancy storytelling, the imagination of a blind poet named Homer, you know, and we don't give it a whole lot of thought, fantasy. But the Scriptures treat it very serious. And he suggests that we should look at the Bible from a mythological worldview. And at first that sounds like a strange statement to say, because we're always taught to look at everything from a biblical worldview. And I'm not saying we shouldn't. But what he's saying is if you look at the Scriptures from a mythological worldview, in other words, understand what's going on in the ancient world with their religions, it wasn't a myth to them. To them, what we call Greek mythology was their pantheon of gods that they worship the same way we worship our God. And so when you look at the Scriptures, especially the Old Testament, you see this constant war of God against the gods. And him always trying to call his beloved back to him because, as it says, they're out whoring with the other gods. He's trying to get them back. And it really, just that simple statement, look at the Bible from a mythological worldview, changes everything, because now a lot of things start to make sense that didn't make sense before in the Scriptures. Like for me, where Yeshua says, and I think it's John chapter 14, he's talking with Philip, and Philip says, "Show us the Father and it'll be sufficient." And what does he say? He says, "Philip, what are you talking about? You've been with me all this time and you're asking me this? If you've seen me, you've seen my Father." Well, that didn't compute in my head, because the Old Testament used to tweak me out. Why? Because you get through the Old Testament and you see these statements where God's saying, "Kill everybody, kill the women, kill the children, wipe out the animals, destroy everything." And without understanding of what's going on from the mythological worldview, God seems like a homicidal maniac. And I could never compute how could Yeshua say that if you've seen me, you've seen my Father. And if you read through the Gospels, you see him loving publicans and sinners and judging nobody except, incidentally, the religious people. Healing everybody he comes in contact with, delivering them from evil. And I'm like, it was like good cop, bad cop. I could never understand what was going on in the Old Testament until you start plugging in the mythology and a creature known as the Nephilim, which we're going to talk more about through this teaching. Yeshua said in Matthew 24:37, "As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be at the coming of the Son of Man." Well, what was going on in the days of Noah? You had increased fallen angel activity, which produced a creature called the Nephilim. The Nephilim are the offspring of angels mating with humans. We'll talk more about that. Nephilim taught humans the art of mixing species. Today we call that transhumanism, the creation of hybrids. Advanced technology, rebellion and hostility against God or toward God, corruption of God's creation, interdimensional portals. We'll talk about that in a minute too. The worship of gods other than Yahweh or Yahuwah, Yod-Heh, Vav-Heh. Men thinking of themselves as gods. Those are things that were going on in the days of Noah. And I'm a visual person, so I like to put things in pictorial format. So I started creating a timeline chart. And it occurred to me, the Scriptures say that as a day with the Lord is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as a day. So I decided to build a chart as days, each column representing a day in God time and 1,000 years in our time, and divided it up by 50, which is the jubilees of the Bible. The Bible talks about jubilees, 50 years, 50-year increments, just to kind of see what was going on in the first 2,000 years after creation. A lot of wild stuff was going on in the first 2,000 years since creation. The Nephilim, or the fallen angels, of what I call the Genesis chapter 6 experiment, where the angels came down and mated with women, took place right around the 9th Jubilee in the days of Jared, which was Noah's, I think, great-great-great-grandfather, somewhere in there. And they were on the earth for between 1,000 to about 1,200 years. Noah shows up right about here. You got the flood right here. And then, now Noah, when it says the days of Noah, a lot of people think about Noah and they think about the ark. Well, of course, that's what he's most famous for. But Noah lived for 600 years before the flood and 350 years after the flood. There's an awful lot of wild stuff that was going on in that period of time. Now, you notice I've also got T-Rex right there, so I'm going to just talk about this really quick, because a lot of times when you're talking about pre-flood world and stuff, the question comes up, who created the dinosaurs? My belief is that God created the dinosaurs, or at least this sort of dinosaurs. I believe he created the four-legged vegetarian dinosaurs. And I believe that's what he's talking about in Job when he's talking about, behold now behemoth. And our lovely translators decided to help us out and say that was a hippo. I'm like, okay, keep reading. He eats grass like an ox. Okay, with strength in his loins. Yeah, he's force in his belly. Okay, his tail moves like a cedar tree. Anybody see the tail of a hippo? Does that look like a cedar tree? Elephant, same thing. Some translations say elephant. Thank you, translators. We don't need your help. Let's just go with the scriptures say. I believe that if you read that whole description of behemoth, I believe it's accurately describing the long neck sauropod type dinosaur. Most of the animal kingdom walks on all fours. There are some exceptions, obviously, like kangaroos and whatnot, but for the most part, the animal kingdom walks on all fours. So I believe that the four-legged dinosaurs, the vegetarians, were created by God. And I believe the proof of that is that they apparently survived the flood, because there's a whole lot of artwork. There's a man right there. There's a long-necked dinosaur right there. This is on a temple in Cambodia. There's all these things. There's a lot more. But I just grabbed a few to show you that dinosaurs, at least this variety, have existed in the memory and the history of mankind with man. You don't see pictures of the other guys with man, like this guy. So where did this guy come from? My personal belief is that the scriptures tell us exactly where they came from. Genesis chapter 6, and God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way upon the earth. And God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth. When you look at this, can you imagine this fitting in the description of creation where God says it was good and very good? This is just nothing but a creator of carnage and mayhem and disaster and death. Right? How does that fit into any of the descriptions of very good? I don't think it fits. I think it fits this description here. There are other books that I am fond of looking at, because so the people in the scriptures also did. Moses and other people were aware of these books. Yeshua quoted from them. Jude and Peter and a lot of the other guys did too. So the book of Enoch is another book that Hebrew people are very familiar with. Said that they, meaning the Nephilim, began to sin against birds, beasts, reptiles, and fish. The book of Joshua says, and the sons of men in those days took the cattle of the earth and the beasts of the field and the fowls of the air, and taught the mixture of animals one species with another, in order to provoke the Lord. Men and cattle and beasts and birds and everything that walked on the earth were all corrupted in their ways and in their orders, and they began to devour each other. The book of Jubilees. There's a lot more. I just grabbed a few. What about these guys right here? You see a lot of these kinds of creatures in the mythology, especially in the Greek mythology. I was in Crete, one of the last trips I did when I was with the mission organization I was a part of. I had a missionary conference in Crete, and as part of that trip I got to go to Greece, and it was actually my second time going there. And I was walking around Athens, and then on the second trip I had a lot more time to myself, so I could really kind of go out and explore and check things out, especially in Athens. You can't look anywhere. It's like every direction you look in, you see the toppled remains of a statue of a god or a temple, or you see remnants of or images of centaurs and minotaurs, satyrs, these kinds of guys. Everywhere. Now, I'm a sci-fi fan. I love Star Wars and Star Trek and all that stuff, and I'm thinking to myself, 4,000 years from now, nobody's going to remember Yoda, the little green guy in Star Wars. He was just the creation of the imagination of a filmmaker named George Lucas, who was trying to create kind of a modern mythology, right? So here's this guy, George Lucas. He creates this little green guy, mythological creature. Nobody's going to remember Yoda 4,000 years from now. So why do the people in, especially the Greek Isles, in that whole area, still have these creatures in their collective consciousness very strong in their way of life, if all it was the imagination of a blind poet named Homer? I began to think that these guys were real, that they actually existed. And by the way, depending on your English translation, satyrs show up quite a few times in the Scriptures, in the canon of Scriptures, what we call the canon. I began to think that they were real. And I came home and told my wife about it, and told her my theory. She checks her email the next morning and starts freaking out, calls me into the other room, and she's showing me this article she popped up, a news report, a BBC news report, that said scientists had successfully cloned a sheep with a human heart. I'm like, and the article went on to say, if we continue to do this, the obvious implication is the genes will fuse together and we're going to end up with animal-human hybrids. And then we'll have ethical issues and all that to deal with, and the article went on to talk about the ethical issues. As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be at the coming of the Son of Man. One of the things the fallen angels and the Nephilim taught people to do was the art of mixing one species with another. That's exactly what we're doing today at alarming rates, and it's very disturbing. Now, these are fictional pictures right here. This is real. This is from back in the 90s. They made a little rat, mouse, whatever, with an ear growing out of its back, a human ear. This is from a movie called Splice. I don't recommend you see it. It's a very disturbing movie and inappropriate, but didn't know what we were getting into when we saw it. But it really talks about the issue of transhumanism and mixing species, especially mixing with the human species, with animal species. Now, you need to know that this is something that scientists are very actively at work trying to make happen. There's a guy by the name of Nick Bostrom, who is the director of the Future of Humanity Institute. Okay, here's these guys that are trying to declare what the future of humanity is going to be about. And this guy's very passionate about this. He says in this little circle right here, this represents the sensory modalities that are accessible to humans. In other words, what our five senses can pick up. We can only see in certain frequencies of light and hear in certain frequencies of sound, and etc. Whereas the animal kingdom has this longer area right here. They can perceive more than we can, hear in different frequencies and see, etc. Bats, radar, and sonar with dolphins. And they say that, okay, if we could start mixing some of these attributes of animals into people, then this could be the area of sensory perception that transhumans could have, animal-human hybrids. You have to know that people like DARPA, the Defense Agency Research Projects people, are thinking about how to make the extended war soldiers, the super soldiers, essentially. We're seeing a lot of movies coming out, like Captain America is about to come out. It's about the creation of super soldiers. Now, whether or not they decide to make a guy that can run like a horse and see and everything like a tiger or whatnot, who knows? But you need to know that the people who are the directors of the future of humanity are talking about how can we improve on God's creation, as we would say. This is what he says posthumans could have. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Or better yet, I'll just go ahead and play a video. Hopefully it'll work. Let them tell you in their own words.
There's more computing capacity in a grain of sand that's been nanoteched, right? There's more computing capacity in that grain of sand than our human being brain's capacity by a factor of, billions, right? So imagine a young woman, she's just given birth, and then she needs to make the decision. Is she going to have her baby modified? Is she going to turn that baby into a cyborg, or effectively an artefakt? So say she decides to do that. So this, hypothetically, this grain of sand, in a sense, that's been nanoteched, is inserted into the human brain, that baby's brain. and it integrates itself into the brain. So that baby, in effect, is no longer human. Because, I mean, think about it. The capacity of that grain of sand is billions of times what the human brain can do. Right? So for, I don't know, 1/1000th of its capacity, of its time, is it doing human things. And the other 99.9999999% of the time, it's doing artelecty type things. So that woman, in a sense, has killed her baby. Killed in the sense the baby's no longer human. It's effectively an artelect. It's an artelect in human disguise.
When we start modifying our brains with technology, then it does change us from the word go. Even just feeding in one electrode with maybe an extra sense, an ultrasonic sense, which we know is quite possible, then it starts to give you abilities and you believe you can do things outside the normal realms of humanity. So your values, your morals start to change immediately. You become a cyborg.
What I'm really interested in is to try to understand the bigger picture for humanity, our place in the world and what might lie in store for our species in the future, particularly the way we might use technologies to enhance ourselves or to go beyond what we currently think of as our human nature, whether it might be by radically extending the human lifespan through solving the problem of aging, or increasing our intellectual capacities, improving our memory, or taking control of our own emotional states. I think that we are right now in a transitional phase where before the end of this century we will either have gone extinct or we will have most likely taken the step to become what you might call transhumans or posthumans, or just very enhanced humans that have reached their full potential.
Because progress is so rapid, I mean, there's going to be more progress in the next 10 years than there were in the previous, I don't know, 20 or 30, right? So the rate of progress is speeding up. It itself is accelerating. So there's going to be hugely more change, technological change in the 21st century than in the 20th. Far more. So all these weird things that sound like science fiction to most people today will probably be realities in a time, in a fewer number of decades than we had imagined.
I can't see any way that it will not happen. This is progress.
Human beings already, theorists, have done the math. They've got the modelling of how to build baby universes. So if that's possible in theory, with human brains doing the thinking, what could an artelect do? Could it actually build universes? Could it actually manipulate whatever exists to create new universes? Is that possible? Now, if it can do that, then by definition, it's a god, right? It's a creator. Can you sort of sense a kind of almost like a religious awe, almost? We could build gods if we wanted to.
Did you hear the promises of Lucifer there? Extended lifespan, thinking capacity. Let's take it a step farther. We could build gods if we wanted to. Interesting. And I think it sheds light on some of these other scriptures from the lips of the Master himself. He said, "For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. And except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened." In Luke, he says, "And there shall be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations and with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear and for looking after those things which are coming upon the earth. For the powers of heaven shall be shaken." Could he be talking about this? Animal-human hybrids. Now, he talked about, he used the word artilects a few times. That guy, Hugo de Garis, he says there's going to be basically three classes of being in the very near future. There'll be Terrans, which are us, normal human beings. Artilects is what he defines as basically a Terminator. They're machines, completely machines that look like people, but they're artificial intelligence, AI. Ardalex. And then you got the combination, which he calls cyborgs, or in this case, you got animal-human hybrid Wolverine. He's a super soldier if you saw the movie. This stuff's already in the works. I think that that's what the Master's saying when he's talking about men's hearts failing them for fear of what's coming upon the earth. What about this scenario here? Mile-wide spaceships parked over cities. You know, I think we've been kind of set up. Going all the way back, really, you could go back in modern times to War of the Worlds. Remember that it was Orson Welles had that radio show that if you tuned in and you missed the disclaimer at the beginning of it, you thought it was a real live news report that there were aliens invading, and people flipped out. People absolutely just went nuts. I think they, whoever they are, you know, they're always responsible for everything. They were testing the waters to see how people would respond, because after they realized how they would respond, we've had a steady diet of flying saucers, spaceships, and all that kind of stuff in television, in pop culture, in movies ever since. More and more so. TV shows, that's from the TV series V that was recently on TV. Mile-wide spaceships parked over cities would have sounded like pure science fiction and just crazy, whatever, go get your tinfoil hat, you know, even 10, 15, maybe 20 years ago. Nowadays, people, I think, are actually waiting for it. They're expecting it. In fact, a mile-wide ship did park over Stephenville, Texas, just a few years ago. And it wasn't just, it used to be that UFO sightings were always that guy out in the, you know, in the farmland somewhere. You could floss his teeth with rope. You know, yeah, I got abducted by aliens, and they took me on their spaceship. Right? That's the way it used to be, right? Back in the 70s and 80s, all those always the whack jobs, you know, the nut jobs out there. But like in Stevensville, you know, it's credible people. You know, there are police officers and mayors and people, you know, talking about this thing that they saw there. UFO sightings have increased exponentially. We're going to talk about that quite a bit in the other presentation called the Mount Herman-Roswell Connection. But suffice it to say, I think we're being prepped to accept something like that. And just so you know how serious they are taking this, the UN has recently appointed somebody to be an ambassador, a UN ambassador, to aliens. They figure, you know what, it's inevitable, sooner or later, you know, intelligent life is going to visit the Earth. We need somebody that can speak on our behalf. So they appointed somebody to be the official spokesperson for planet Earth should an alien life form decide to visit us. And the Vatican came alongside and said, yeah, we'll baptize them when they show up. That's serious. These guys are serious about this stuff. We all may be familiar with this painting right here, this famous painting, God and Adam. I submit that that's not really God, and that's a whole other teaching in and of itself. This is a very disturbing painting when you actually analyze it. But for the sake of this discussion, let's say this represents God and Adam. We're all familiar, at least with this part of the picture. You've probably seen a lot of those paintings. It's going to be replaced by this. Those of you who understand Hebrew know that, you know, in English we say that Yeshua or Jesus said, I am the Alpha and the Omega. Well, in Hebrew it's Aleph and Tav. And if you were to pronounce the Aleph and Tav, it's Et. Et. Okay? We're being programmed for a coming great deception. And you know what? There's nothing new about it, really. Solomon said, what has been will be again, and what has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. Reiterated by Yeshua, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be at the coming of the Son of Man. How many of you think we're getting close to the coming of the Son of Man? I do. I think we're getting very close. Looking at the picture again, that's what we might be having to expect to see showing up in the very near future. All kinds of strange stuff. Increased fallen angel activity produced Nephilim offspring. Genesis 6 says the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. So apparently Moses was also a Euhemerist. Believed that he linked the ancient deities to men. This is just sort of a breakdown. This shows the Hebrew perspective from Noah and following some of their generations. But I started to look at the various pantheon of gods and tried to create some family trees to show the kind of the breakdown of the family gods, the family of gods. This represents the Sumerians, the Sumerian, Assyrian, Babylonian god family tree. This is the Egyptian, and this is the one most people are familiar with, the Greek pantheon right there. Within each of those, you got what essentially the Bible says there were giants in the land in those days. They would be called Titans, and they would be called Olympians and things like that in the Greek mythology. In the Scriptures, we have evidence of very big people. Now, this is your average 6-footer right here. I'm about 6 foot tall, so it'd be about like me. Then you've got Goliath, which is anywhere from 9 to 12 feet tall, most scholars believe. Og of Bashan is another guy mentioned in Scriptures, about 18 feet when they describe his bed. Early Canaanite giants, I got 24 to 36 feet, but they could have actually gotten as big as 150 feet, according to Amos, and we'll talk about that scripture a little bit later too. Okay, the pre-flood giants, on the other hand, were way bigger than that. Some of the extra biblical texts talk about them being 3,000 ells. An ell or 3,000 ells equals about 300 cubits or 450 feet, which I find very interesting because that's the same dimension as the length of the ark. But the pre-flood giants apparently got to 450 feet, if you can imagine that. The Greeks imagined it. They called them the Titans. Post-flood were considerably smaller and continued to get smaller. Is there any evidence out there that these guys were real? I believe the Scriptures are enough evidence, but if we need more proof, throughout history, these are documented skeleton sizes in various times in history where they found these different skeletons. There's a book by Steve Quayle, I have it up here. You see how thick the book is, that goes into detail about all the various discoveries all around the world throughout history, even in recent times, of giants being found in the earth. Post-flood giants, I believe they were sons of Ham. If we look at the Scriptures, they're the Canaanites and all the Hivites and Jebusites and all that are described in the Scriptures. In Numbers 13:33, that's the first time we see the giants show up after the floods, the first appearance in the Scriptures of post-flood giants. And that's when they send spies into the land. Remember, they go check out the land, and they came back and said, whoa, they're carrying a cluster of grapes, 2 guys on a pole, carrying just one cluster of grapes. So even the grapes are big. The land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are of great size. We saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. So the Nephilim in the post-flood world come from Nephilim. Do you see any evidence of fallen angels in that text? It doesn't say that fallen angels are producing these guys. It says Nephilim are producing these guys. We'll talk about that in the next session. Yet I destroyed the Amorites. This is the scripture I talked about before, Amos chapter 2. I destroyed the Amorites who were descendants of Canaan. Right? Before them, though they were tall as cedars. I don't think God's in the habit of telling tall tales, fish tales. I think when he describes somebody as tall as a cedar tree, he was probably standing next to a cedar tree. Same height. Cedar trees, by the way, start at 35 feet and go as high as 150 feet. That's why I put the Amorite question mark, 150 feet. The cedars of Lebanon, they can get very, very tall. Again, in the post-flood scenario, all you see is giants, but you don't see any mention of angels in regard to how they showed up. You see them showing up in one of the sons of Noah, Ham. And I've kind of highlighted Ham right there, because if we look at his children, he had 4 sons, Canaan, Mitzrayim, Put, and Cush. And as you start looking at through these lineages, you start seeing giants in them. Obviously, Canaan, the whole land of Canaan was full of giants, and the Israelites were always having to deal with them, right? All the ites. Joshua and his boys had to take out, and David and his boys took out later, Goliath and whatnot. So you got lots of giants in Canaan. Mitzrayim is Egypt. Mitzrayim had a son by the name of Caphtor. Caphtor is mentioned in Genesis, Jeremiah, and Amos as being the father of the Philistines. Well, we know of at least 5 giants that came from the Philistines, right? Goliath and his 4 brothers. So apparently Caphtor was a giant, had Nephilim seed within his loins, so to speak. Caphtor settled the island of Crete. Well, the interesting thing about that is all of the Greek gods originated in Crete. All the Greek gods come from Crete. Mitzrayim's son Caphtor settled Crete. Put, there's really no evidence that I could find of giants in Put's lineage. Put is Libya. Cush had a very interesting son by the name of Nimrod that I suspect was also a giant, and we'll talk about that in a second. I didn't really think there was any evidence in any of the other sons. There's definitely no evidence of Nephilim seed in Shem because the Messiah came through that line, and the Messiah's seed had to be pure. However, in Japheth's line, Recently, I discovered what I think is evidence of some giants in two characters that we're going to be familiar with in the end times, called Gog and Magog. Gog and Magog are sons of Japheth. Now, in the United Kingdom, they have a celebration every year called the Lord Mayor Parade, and they march these two huge statues in the parade, and they're named Gog and Magog. And as you trace the background and history of that, they are apparently two giants that settled the British Islands way, way back in ancient times. So there may be evidence that there were giants in Japheth's line as well. What I find interesting about that is Lucifer is outnumbered 2-1, right? He took 1/3 of the angels with him, so there's 2/3 of the good angels and 1/3 of the bad angels. In this scenario, if it's true that Japheth also had corrupted serpent seed, then it seems like the tables are turned a little bit in terms of man. 1/3 good, 2/3 corrupt. So you see kind of a reversal right there going on, possibly. The table of nations in Genesis chapter 10, men begin to reproduce, and Genesis chapter 10 gives you the sons of Japheth and Ham and Shem, and they come up to about 70. Okay, so you got 70 people produced essentially from 4 couples. You got Noah and his wife, and you got the 3 sons and their 3 wives. Together they produced 70 people, and presumably about 100 years or so, because as you turn the page to chapter 11, you see the whole earth was of one language. Well, we just showed you the whole earth, post-flood, about 100 years, 150 years after the flood, the whole earth consisted of, 70 people. On the high side, possibly, because it's only given the male people in the lineage there, possibly there could be a few hundred, but definitely under 1,000 people by that time, I believe. And they all gathered together. They're all of one language. They went to the plains of Shinar, and they hung out with a guy by the name of Nimrod, who decided to build a tower whose top may reach into heaven. Well, first thing we should note is that the tower was built in a valley, so they clearly weren't concerned with height. God doesn't seem to be concerned with height either. He didn't freak out when we built the World Trade Centers or the Empire State Building or anything. So what was going on with the Tower of Babel? I believe it was actually an interdimensional portal that they were trying to create, because it says they were trying to reach into heaven. And apparently whatever they were trying to do, God said, He looked down and He says, now nothing that they imagine to do will be restrained from them, and decides to go down and confound their languages. Okay? So whatever they're trying to do apparently was at least possible. And if you look at the extra-biblical texts that the Jews were very familiar with, they say that Nimrod had divided the people up into 3 camps. And the 3 camps, basically, in a nutshell, their intention was to make war with God, conquer heaven, kill God, and set up their own gods in the Holy of Holies in heaven. That was their plan. And at least in theory, it possibly may have been possible. So God decided to mess up their plans. And He divided the nations up into 70 people groups. There were 70 languages that went out. And Nimrod here says, began to become a mighty one in the earth. The phrase mighty one is a very interesting Hebrew word. It's Gabor, Gaborim. I believe you have to interpret that in context with whatever's being said around it, because it could mean, just like it says, mighty one. David had his mighty men. I don't believe David's mighty men were giants or Nephilim, because they were busy killing giants and Nephilim, and they were on the good side, But in this case, I believe mighty one could also be translated, as it is in other places, as giant. And the reason I say that is because there's an awful lot of things associated with Nimrod that will, as we will see in a minute, lead us to believe that. Like I said, the tower was built in a valley, and I believe it probably looked more like a ziggurat than the traditional cone-shaped kind of thing you see in a lot of the paintings. I believe it was more like something like that, and possibly some sort of interdimensional advanced technology probably going on there. There's a couple of people that I've become very fond of their research. Peter Goodgame wrote a online book. You go to redmoonrising.com and download it for free. It's called The Giza Discovery. He does an amazing job of breaking down who this guy was in the ancient world. Phenomenal book. Followed by these other 2 books by a gentleman by the name of Thomas Horn. And the first one here is Nephilim Stargates. Okay? And he talks about the whole idea that a lot of these temples and pyramids and things may have been designed to be interdimensional pathways. And you can see evidence of that even in the Incans and the Mayans and some of their temples and what they believe with Quetzalcoatl and the serpent god coming back and coming down the stairs and all that. So that there seems to be evidence that supports that. Apollyon Rising 2012 is another really amazing book dealing with the character of Nimrod. And basically, when you take these three books together, they really talk about this guy being the man of myth. The dominant myth being the Assyrian, Babylonian, Sumerian myths, the Egyptian, and the Greek myths. And as you get a little further in looking at all of that, you realize that he really is a man of many names. Why? Because at the Tower of Babel, first of all, a kingdom is a domain run by a king, right? An empire is an organization that has many kingdoms in it and ruled by an emperor, right? I believe that Nimrod was the first emperor of the old world order. Everybody talks about the new world order coming up. I believe he was the emperor of the old world order of kingdoms because they were all gathered together under his leadership. And then when God confounded the language, the people went their separate ways, 70 different directions, 70 different languages, talking about the same guy. But now he had different names. Different languages produce different names. Nimrod's not a name anyway, by the way. Nimrod is a title. It means the rebellious one, or one who rebels. So I believe some of them went away calling him Gilgamesh. Some went away calling him Baal. Baal comes up a lot, doesn't he? Melkart, Adonis, go through the list right here. A couple of really interesting ones. Orion, Apollo, Osiris are some very interesting characters that he has appeared as throughout history. Now, what's the proof? Well, start reading about who these other guys were, and many times the descriptions are almost exactly the same as the Hebrew description of Nimrod. A lot of them are referred to as mighty hunter. A lot of depictions of these other characters show this fascination with a lion. What is Yeshua called? The Lion of the tribe of Judah, right? Well, this is Gilgamesh. Shows that he's a giant. Very big guy holding a lion. You got Orion up in the sky with a club raised to strike the lion. You got Baal right here in almost the same pose as Orion. Ninurta, they're all through history you see descriptions of these mighty hunters by different names, but I believe all of them are referring to the same guy, that being Nimrod. This is Marduk right here of the Sumerians. The earliest evidence of any civilization points to the 3000 to 3500 time frame. Almost every scholar agrees, secular or otherwise, biblical scholars. Everybody looks to the ancient record and sees an advanced technology and civilization really showing up around the 3000 to 3500 time frame, not much before it. According to the books of Enoch and Joshua, that's when a class of angels called the Watchers came down in Genesis chapter 6 and mated with women and produced Nephilim when they landed on Mount Hermon. That's also the time frame that the Mayan calendar shows up in. Most scholars peg the Mayan calendar showing up at 3114 BC. Let's look at our chart again. 3114 BC. Okay, right about the middle of the time frame that the Nephilim were on the earth. A lot of things were going on in that time period. The Sumerian religion influenced Mesopotamian mythology as a whole, surviving in the mythologies and religions of the Hurarians, Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians, and other culture groups. So really it all starts in Babylon. What do we talk about Babylon being the mother of all harlots, Mystery Babylon? That's where it all kind of gets started. The 32nd century BC, I'm not going to read all that, but suffice it to say, that's the period when all kinds of megalithic structures show up. Big temples and Stonehenge and things like that appear to have their dates right around that same time frame. So they apparently were built before the flood, maybe in an effort to save themselves or whatever. I don't know, but a lot of the evidence points that they were built before the flood. Like I said, Mystery Babylon we know as the mother of all harlots, or let's say false religions. The Recognitions of Clement says, fallen angels taught men the use of magical incantations that would force demons to obey man. This became ingrained into the Egyptians, Persians, and Babylonians. Nimrod, called Ninus by the Greeks, was handed this knowledge and by it caused men to go away from the worship of God and go into diverse and erratic superstitions, and they began to be governed by the signs in the stars and motions of the planets. It starts with Nimrod. It starts in Babylon. The Sumerians had a very complicated family tree of gods. This is one of the more common ones that I've seen out there. I decided to simplify it a bit because when you're looking at a lot of these things, you realize that the upper tier, a lot of what I call the upper tier, the source tier, are ethereal. They're like sky and like water and atmosphere and things like that. You don't get into kind of the personality realm where they tend to take on more like a human type of personality until you get a little further down. So I just kind of abbreviated the top section there and got to the more popular ones here. In the middle tier is where two guys in particular in the Sumerian mythology show up, Enlil and Enki. Those are their dominant gods in the Sumerian religion. Enlil and Enki, what's really interesting as you read the mythology, Enlil is basically the equivalent of the Hebrew Yahweh or Yahuwah. Enki is the equivalent of Lucifer. In their mythology, they worked on the creation together and whatnot. And Enlil's idea was to have a slave race that would serve him. And Enki thought, no, I think they deserve to have wisdom and knowledge, and we should, help them to be more like us. So it was Enki that was the serpent in the garden that got Eve to take in Adam of the knowledge of the tree of good and evil. And when Enlil saw what happened, he got mad, so he kicked them out of the garden, and it was Enki that showed up and gave them the clothing so that they wouldn't be ashamed. And then as men began to reproduce on the earth, Enlil got sick of all the noise, so he decided to wipe out the whole world with a flood, and Enki said, no, I'm going to save them, so Enki was the one that told Noah to build the ark. See how it's totally reversed? What's really interesting about that is that a lot of people are talking about these characters. They're referred to as the Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came. And you see a lot of depictions of these giants and people and stuff in the ancient Sumerian and ancient cultures depicting these guys. And a lot of TV shows are coming out talking about these because of what's coming next year, December 21st, 2012. Everybody's talking about it, right? Now, you got the Mayans with their little calendar, December 21st, but you also got people talking about the planet Nibiru, Planet X, the return of this other planet that causes chaos in the solar system. Well, that's supposed to be the homeworld of the Anunnaki. Nibiru, in the mythology, is the homeworld of the Anunnaki. The Ancient Alien series on the History Channel, I think they're in their third season now. I know they've done 2 seasons already. I've spent a lot of time talking about it, and it really disturbs me because they always put what they say are theologians on there, but these guys are real yahoos. They're like, they're supposed to represent those who believe in the scriptures, but the things they say, you're like, where did they get these guys from? Come on. And they're supposed to represent the truth? Anyway, that whole TV series is based on Eric von Daniken's book from I think, the late 1960s, early 1970s called Chariots of the Gods. And there are other books by Zecharia Sitchin and others that talk about ancient aliens visiting our planet. And, of course, if you're a sci-fi fan, there's the Battlestar Galactica series.
There are those who believe that life here began out there, far across the universe, with tribes of humans who may have been the forefathers of the Egyptians, or the Toltecs, or the Mayans.
Right? We're being brainwashed on a regular basis. In the mythology, they have, and in a lot of their ancient, hieroglyphs and carvings and whatnot, you see creatures such as this guy right here, human body, bird head. This right here, I am becoming more and more convinced is probably what was known as a key-stored orca. We would think of it as like the genie in the bottle. It's where they would store souls. There's a container for souls. And this right here, I think, is probably the pineal gland of a giant, of a Nephilim. Pineal gland is the third eye that the occult and all those people are always obsessed with. When you look over, this is Sumerian, when you look over in the Egyptian mythology, you see Horus here, same kind of guy. Human body, bird head. I think that at some point in time there was a crossover from Sumeria into Egypt. How did that happen? Well, this guy right here, being the emperor of many kingdoms, would make his rounds to survey, the areas that he ruled over. And a very interesting story about how the word Pharaoh came about. There's a guy by the name of Rikeon. He was a guy who came into the land of Egypt and was having trouble finding work. And so he was an entrepreneur and kind of a scoundrel. And he realized that he could He figured a way to create a death tax, basically. Charge people money for the right to bury their dead. And so in order to bury their loved one, they had to pay this guy first, a death tax. The guy became very wealthy. One day, Osiris came to town. Osiris is the Egyptian name for Nimrod. Osiris comes to town. The people are freaking out about this Raikon guy. But Raikon was wise. He knew that the king was coming. So he had amassed a tremendous amount of wealth. He took all the gold and all the stuff that he had acquired and bestowed it upon the visiting king as a gift to welcome him. Now, of course, Nimrod was very excited about that. And he asked him how he became so wealthy, and he told him about this death tax thing. And Nimrod thought that was brilliant. Wow, you got people to pay you for burying the dead? Huh. He changed his name to Pharaoh. Osiris changed Raikon's name to Pharaoh because of the wealth acquired from a death tax. So that should give you an indication of the character of the pharaohs thereafter. Interesting thing about his incarnation as Osiris is this symbol right here became associated with him. That's the Ankh. It represents resurrection. The Ankh is a symbol of resurrection. He's also known by the all-seeing eye. Right? This is a bust of his head right there. Who does that look like if I didn't tell you anything else, just off the top of your head? Somebody you've seen in the news recently? Osama bin Laden. Looks a lot like him. In fact, the first pictures that came out of his supposed assassination, which I personally believe is garbage, but it's SEAL Team 6 on the 66th anniversary of Hitler's death, on May 1st, the founding of the Illuminati, supposedly captured and killed Osama bin Laden. They shot him through the left eye and then dumped him in the ocean. Yeah, I'm stupid. I buy that. This is the little left eye on the back of your dollar bill. Okay? This country is founded on this guy. We'll see a little bit more about that in a minute. In the mythologies, this is the Sumerian and this is the Egyptian. In the what I call the final tier or the demigod tier, which is the mixture of the gods and the humans, right? You got Marduk, Ninurta, and Gilgamesh. Those are all synonymous with Nimrod. Okay, different sects of that area called him by different names. He shows up here in the Egyptian pantheon as Osiris. In the Greek pantheon, I believe he's Apollo. Now, what's interesting about Apollo is he's the son of Zeus, and I believe Zeus was actually a real human being that walked the earth that probably had a similar influence much later down the line as Nimrod did earlier. I believe Zeus picked up where Nimrod left off as an individual. Zeus's tomb, I believe it's in Crete. I forget, I have to look at this book again, but it's either Crete or Cyprus. There is a place that you could go to today that is the tomb of Zeus. So he was apparently a human being that died, probably lived a long age, probably became very famous, a man of renown. But after he died, I suspect that the devil said, wow, this guy really made an impact. I think I can use this. And I believe that the devil probably took on the appearance and the name of Zeus, because Zeus, as you'll see in the New Testament, is Lucifer. Satan's seat mentioned in Revelation chapter 2. In Pergamum, Satan's seat was the altar of Zeus in Pergamum. So, and there's a lot of other descriptions. He's the god of the sky and, lightning, and I saw Lucifer fall like lightning. There's a lot of passages of Scripture that lead me to believe that the devil took on that persona afterwards. Now, what did the devil say, right? You shall be like gods. Well, the pharaohs thought they were gods. The Caesars thought they were gods. Kings thought they were gods all through the ancient world. What about presidents? Believe it or not, kings and queens and stuff still think they are. And I submit to you that in some ways the presidents do too. They certainly think they're above the law. They think they're above the Constitution. They think they can do whatever they want. But let's go back and look at our presidents, starting with the very first one, George Washington. You could walk into the Capitol Dome in Washington, D.C., look up into the womb of Isis, because that's what the Capitol Dome is, the womb of Isis, with the phallic symbol down the road of Osiris's missing piece, the Washington Monument. All right? This picture right here is called the apotheosis of George Washington. Look up in the Capitol Dome, and that's what you're going to see. Surrounded by 72, which is a high occult number, pentagrams which are known as binding pentagrams. That's how the ancients believe they can, and the occult believes they can control demons. You got George right here in heaven. The apotheosis means ascending into godhood. That's what apotheosis means. Okay? If this is supposedly heaven, you might think you'd see, maybe the saints, see, Yeshua up there, see the angels, Michael, Gabriel. No, that's not what you see. You see Neptune, you see Vulcan, you see the Greek pantheon hanging up there with deified George in the Capitol building. And not to be outdone, when Abraham Lincoln died, they started putting out postcards and whatnot showing the apotheosis of Abraham Lincoln. I bet you've probably never seen this before. They've tucked it away. It used to be out in the outdoors. They put it inside a museum now. This is George Washington posing as a god. Which god? Zeus. This is a depiction of Zeus from the Temple of Zeus, which was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Also, it's the same pose as the occult symbol for Baphomet. Oh, this is a Christian nation. Yeah, okay. There were Christians on the boat, but you also have to realize there were Illuminists on the boat, there were Freemasons on the boat, there were a lot of occultists on the boat also. And if you look at the entire layout of Washington, D.C., it's all occult. Look at all the buildings. It's all after Greek mythology, too. What did Solomon say? What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. So what about this guy? Funny how he shows up a lot of times with a halo around his head every time they seem to take a picture of him. Photo op, it seems like he's got a little aura around his head. Well, when he was making his rounds, going around the country, so was this guy. Took a little photo op in front of the equally pagan Statue of Liberty. This is Anubis. Anubis was the god of the underworld until Osiris came down there and usurped his rulership. Osiris became the god of the underworld, and then he started working for Osiris. But he was the god in charge of mummification. Nimrod was the first to be mummified. Why? Because of the Ankh. They expect him to resurrect. That's what all of the pyramids and all that was all about. Resurrection, mummification, preservation of the dead. He was in charge of that. He was in charge of the preservation of the dead. He was also in charge of when you came to Hades, he would quiz you to see which direction to send you in. Obama's making his tour around the country. This guy's going around the country with him. He parks in the Denver International Airport, which is an extremely occult facility. It'll take too much to talk about that. But when he was in Germany, he was fascinated by, this is the seat of Satan that was mentioned in Revelation chapter 2, that was the altar of Zeus. Was in Pergamum, Turkey, moved it to the Berlin Museum just prior to World War II. Hitler loved it. Guess what? Obama loved it too. So much so that he made a replica of it for his acceptance speech in Denver, Colorado. Obama gave his acceptance speech in front of a replica of the seat of Satan. In Denver, Colorado, besides Anubis. While he was in Egypt in 2009, all the vendors in Cairo had made these metal plaques to sell, calling Obama the new Tutankhamun of the world. Tutankhamun was the son of Akhenaten. Akhenaten was a very strange character indeed, but one of the things Akhenaten did was he got rid of all the gods of Egypt and instituted a monotheistic system of worship of one god in Egypt. His son, King Tut, comes along, undoes everything his dad created, and his son was the one that brought back the worship of the old gods. Obama, the new King Tut of the world. Could it be that he's going to be the one that brings back the worship of the old gods? I don't know, just putting it out there. He goes out to Norway, the man of peace, right? Goes for a Nobel Peace Prize. What the heck did the guy do? Nobody even knew he existed a few years ago. Goes to Norway for a Nobel Peace Prize, and while he's doing that, this thing shows up in the sky. Later they said it was a failed missile. Does that look like a failed missile to you? Come on. It's like the weather balloons back in the 50s. You know, every UFO was a weather balloon. Now it's failed missiles. What does all of this have to do with this guy right here? What does it have to do with this right here? And the whole idea of we come in peace. Always, as Anna would say, those of you who have ever watched the TV series V. Well, who is the Antichrist? There's several descriptions throughout Scripture to help us out. I personally believe that, because Yeshua says it's going to be a day like never before, like has never been and never will be again. It's going to be one heck of a time, right? Do you really think that God is going to leave us hanging concerning the details of the most significant time in history that we're going to have to be concerned with? I don't think so. I believe God tells us exactly who the Antichrist is in Scripture. Several descriptions. The Old Testament uses the phrase the Assyrian. Okay, I didn't put that one up here, but that one's a phrase that's used repeatedly about the end times tyrant, the phrase the Assyrian. He is the one who was and is not and yet shall be. If you read the book of Revelation, it starts off with talking about Yeshua repeatedly as the one who what? Was and is to come. As soon as you start talking about the beast, it changes to the one who was and is not and yet shall be. Interesting. Antichrist is empowered by Satan. He recovers from a mortal head wound. He is called the beast. The beast had, or has, 7 heads. Associated with the desert and secret chambers, the whole world worships him. He sets himself up as king of the New World Order. He thinks of himself as God. He wages war against God. His number is 666. He will be cast alive into the lake of fire. Those are several descriptions that we can look at. Let's go a little bit further. I believe the answer can be found in these 4 scriptures right here. There are many others, but these 4 really knock a home run, I believe. Revelation chapter 17 describes the Antichrist as having 7 heads. The beast that you saw was and is not and will ascend out of the bottomless pit. Where is he coming from? He's coming from the bottomless pit, okay? And he'll go into perdition. And those who dwell on the earth will marvel, whose names are not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they see the beast that was and is not and yet is. Here is the mind which has wisdom. In other words, pay attention. Guys, think about this a little bit. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. There are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other has not yet come, and when he comes, he must continue for a short time. The beast that was and is not is himself also the 8th and is of the 7. Okay, so the beast is of the 7 and goes into perdition. Who are the 7? This is a list that I got from Peter Goodgame's book, The Keys of Discovery. As I started doing my own research, I agree with his list. He believes, as I do, that the 7 heads of the beast, the 7 antichrists that are mentioned there, antichrist-like characters, I believe are these guys right here. Nimrod tried to create a one-world system without God, tried to kill God. Fits the description pretty good. Pharaoh thought himself as a god, tried to kill God's people. Fits the description pretty good. Sennacherib, same thing. Thought himself a god, tried to kill the people. That's when the angel of the Lord came and wiped out like 700,000 in one night, I think it was. He went home totally defeated and his sons killed him. King of Tyre, described as a man, and as in the middle of the description starts talking about him as Lucifer in the scripture. So clearly this guy had some association with the devil. Antiochus Epiphanes is a character that showed up, I think it was about 125 or so BC, set up an altar of Zeus in the temple and offered a pig, what we might consider possibly the abomination of desolation, or a foreshadowing of it. I believe he fits that description as, I believe those are the 5 that have fallen that John was writing about. Then he says, the one who now is, depends on when you believe the book of Revelation was written, because that's when he said it was it. It is. Depends if you think it was during the reign of Nero or Domitian, earlier or later date of Revelation. I personally believe in the earlier date of Revelation, which puts it at Nero. Nero was clearly an antichrist character. I mean, he would light people up on fire and have candlelit dinners to the burning Christians. Definitely fits the description. And the one who shall come and reign for a short time, I believe, arguably has to be Hitler. I don't know that he thought of himself as a god, probably he did, but he certainly did some pretty horrific things. So I believe that these are the 7 mentioned right there. Okay, so then let's go ahead and go to Revelation chapter 13. 13 says that he shall have a mortal head wound that will be healed. And I saw one of the heads as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed. Right? So let's look at the list. Who had a mortal head wound? Well, Nimrod, the ancient texts say, was killed by Esau, which is a very cool story. I don't have time to go into it right now, but we can maybe talk about it later. But essentially, Esau cut his head off. And it gives a lot more meaning to the whole passage where he says, give me some bowl of beans, I'll give you my birthright. What do I care, lest I die? Give me some food. He had just killed the king of the world right before that. So he clearly had a mortal head wound. Nero is believed to have stabbed himself in the throat, so maybe that's a head wound. Hitler supposedly shot himself in the head, although recent forensic evidence shows otherwise. In fact, most people now believe, well, I don't know if most people do, a lot of people believe that he escaped to Antarctica, but again, that's another story. So for the sake of argument, we got 3 who had a mortal head wound. Right? Revelation chapter 9. His name is Apollyon. Then the 5th angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven to the earth. To him was given the key to the bottomless pit. And he opened the bottomless pit, and smoke arose out of the bottomless pit like the smoke of a great furnace. So the sun and the air were darkened because of the smoke of the pit. Then out of the smoke locusts came upon the earth. And they had a king over them, the angel of the bottomless pit. Where does the beast come from? Comes from the bottomless pit, right? We saw that. Whose name in Hebrew is Abaddon, but in Greek his name is Apollyon. Apollyon is a derivative spelling of Apollo. His name is Apollo. In desert or secret chambers. This, I believe, is the home run scripture. This is where Yeshua himself says, then if talking about Antichrist in the last days in Matthew 24, then if anyone says to you, look, here is the Christ, or there, do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will rise and show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you beforehand. In other words, pay attention. I'm telling you this in advance, okay? So you guys get it. Therefore, if they say to you, look, he is in the desert, do not go out. Or look, he is in the secret chambers, do not believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and flashes to the west, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For wherever the carcass is, there the eagles shall be gathered together. Again, the modern translators of English tried to help us out. Thank you very much. Stop tampering with the Word of God. They changed that to vultures. Why? Because everybody knows that eagles don't go after dead things, go after live things. No, the scriptures say eagle. Let's leave it the way it says, right? Now, here's some very interesting things. Remember we told you that the Ankh represents resurrection. Symbol of resurrection. What's the symbol most associated with Yeshua, with Jesus? Cross, right? Think Jesus, think cross. Think this guy, cross. What did Yeshua do? He resurrected. What's this guy going to do? 1999, Zahi Hawass, one of the most renowned archaeologists in Egypt, said in 1999, I have found a shaft going down 29 meters vertically right here, between the center pyramid and the Sphinx is where they found it. At the bottom, there was a chamber that was filled with water. We have found a burial chamber with 4 pillars. In the middle is a large granite sarcophagus, which I expect to be the grave of Osiris, the god. I have been digging in Egypt's sand for more than 30 years, and up to date, this is the most exciting discovery I have made. This is a rendering of what they found. They went down and they found an area that had like 6 sarcophagus, and then they went down into the 7th one was a tunnel that went down into another chamber that was filled with water. The scriptures talk about the Antichrist coming out of water, right? The sea, as they say. This is what they found. This is an artist's rendering of it. They found a moat of water. They pumped the whole thing out. It was full of water, so they pumped all the water out. When they got the water out, this is what they found. There was a moat of water surrounding a square island that had 4 pillars that had ancient writing on it that I would believe are probably instructions for something. In the middle was another moat of water with a little island with about a 10-foot sarcophagus that was empty. The empty tomb of Osiris. Okay. 2003, Gilgamesh tomb was found in the desert of Iraq. One of the things they said about Gilgamesh from the Epic of Gilgamesh, who can compare with him in kingliness? Who can say, like Gilgamesh, I am king? What does the scripture say about the Antichrist? Who is like the beast? Who can wage war with the beast? Very similar. By the way, Gilgamesh was said to have been, according to the Epic of Gilgamesh, 2/3 God, 1/3 man. Percentage-wise, 2/3 is what? 66.6%. Just throwing it out there. All right. Our troops went to war. Gilgamesh's tomb was found in April of 2003. We went to war in May. A month later. Kicked out all the archaeologists. First thing our troops did, you can look this up for yourself, first thing our troops did was raid the Museum of Baghdad. You may remember the news reports. We raided the Museum of Baghdad, first thing we did. And then June, about a month later, U.S. authorities announced, oh, yeah, this is great, right? Create the problem, create the solution. Aren't we wonderful? U.S. authorities announced that the world-famous treasures of Nimrud, which is another Nimrod, derivative of Nimrod, were recovered from a secret vault in Iraq's central bank. The artifacts included necklaces, plates, gold earrings, finger and toe rings, bowls, and flasks. Officials said that of the 170,000 items initially believed missing, just 3,000 remain unaccounted for. Yeah, do you think the 3,000 unaccounted for items that we stole from the Museum of Baghdad were toe rings and nose rings? I don't think so. I think we took some pretty significant artifacts. And of those 47 were main exhibit artifacts. Okay, first thing we did, raid the Museum of Baghdad a month after we found Gilgamesh. What did Yeshua say? What did he say? If they say he's in the desert, don't go there. Gilgamesh found in the desert. They say he's in the secret chambers, don't believe them. December 21st, last year, 2010. My wife and I are late nighters. We stay up late at night, and a lot of times we go out for a walk, like 2 o'clock in the morning. And we were out December 21st, the winter solstice. Everybody's talking about December 21st, 2012. Well, December 21st, 2010, we were going out for a walk. Looked up in the sky at about 2:22 in the morning, and I saw the moon going into a full lunar eclipse for 72. Remember that number? 72? 72 demons and pentagrams and all that. 72 minutes, the moon went into a blood-red lunar eclipse, floating over the shoulders of Orion, who is also Nimrod. Nimrod lost his head to Esau's sword, right? I looked up and I saw a decapitated blood-red head, looked like, floating over the shoulders of Orion at 2:22 in the morning. Oh, by the way, 2:22 in the morning Central Standard Time is 3:22 in the morning Eastern Standard Time. 322 is the coveted number of the Skull and Bone Society, of which both Bush family, but the whole Bush family, has been strongly associated with, as was Kerry. 2 Illuminist, 322. What's that? A skull? A decapitated head on top of a pile of bones? 322. What was happening in Iraq at that very moment? Iraq had just announced the foundation of its newly formed government. And the entire planet, you could look this up for yourself, shook. The seismographic monitors that check earthquake activity around the world, every one of them went into the black that night.
Today is December 21st, Tuesday, 2010 at 6:13 p.m. Central Standard Time. And we are looking at the live internet seismic server, which is still recording a gigantic earth movement at all stations around the world. Now, this began last night at approximately 1 to 2 hours before the eclipse. And originally, I thought this may be a signature from the Iran earthquake that happened yesterday, which was a 6.5 on the Richter. However, it continued all night and into today with a crescendo in Japan of a 7.4. And now, as of, and I'll just click on any one of these, I mean, all shaking through the roof, but we'll just click on Norway's, let's say. And as of 23:47 Greenwich Mean Time, we still have a gigantic disturbance happening. And this is not the Japan disturbance. This is some other anomaly that is showing up all around the world. I have never seen anything like this in the time that I've looked at this data set. I mean, in Arizona, it's showing just off the chart. The evidence speaks for itself. And you can see the date timestamp, 12/21/2010, 16:49 Mountain Standard Time, which is 23:49 Greenwich Mean Time. So, just to prove that this is not showing up, and are either censoring this data or it's some other kind of anomaly, is the current USGS World Global readout of earthquakes. And within the last hour, we've had a 5.1 aftershock in Japan, which any geologist would be able to tell you. If you want to go back and look at prior data, you can see that a 5.1 does not show up as a huge off-the-chart earthquake all around the world at all the heliographs around the world.
What's going on? I don't know. Makes you think, though. Washington, D.C., they have a statue coming out of the ground. It's called the Awakening in Washington, D.C. Shows a God coming up, a bearded God coming up out of the ground. It's called the Awakening. Could that be what we're really doing over there? First of all, let me just say, don't accuse me of not being patriotic. I'm third-generation Army. My dad was in Vietnam. My grandfather was in World War II, and I served during Desert Storm for 8 years. I was not in combat, but I was willing to and volunteered 3 times. I love my country, but I don't agree with everything this country does or that our leaders do. And I'm beginning to believe that the sole purpose of America has been what we're talking about here. It goes all the way back to the founding of this country and all the Illuminati and Freemasonry and all that stuff that's all over Washington, D.C. And things like this. And the fact that every president that we've had has been related to each other. Every single one of them. They all go back to the House of Plantagenet in England. Every single president. Is that a coincidence? What are the odds of every U.S. president being related, except for Martin Van Buren, all related to the same guy? We do not elect our presidents. Anyway, if it's true, then it makes sense when Yeshua said, wherever the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathered together. In the service, when I had my dress uniform on, or even my combat uniform, we were adorned with eagles from the top of our head to the bottom of our feet. Eagles on our buttons, eagles on our badges, eagles on our patches, eagles everywhere. Eagles is also the symbol of almost every world empire going way back. Roman Empire, eagle. American, eagle. I don't know. I believe we are being set up for a great deception that has been set in motion thousands of years ago. And all of it's going to come into play. Will these guys have something to do with bringing this guy back? I don't know. I don't believe these guys are from Orion or from the Pleiades or Arcturus or, I believe this is repackaged Genesis 6 activity. This is fallen angel stuff. I've written extensively about it. I have a book that's in the works right now. It's called Babylon Rising, and the first shall be the last. It's got about 300 pages to it so far. A lot of pictures in it, so it's not all text, 300 pages. It's available online, and we've prepared a special DVD for this presentation because this is all my wife and I do. Is we are trying, if this is true, if anything that I'm saying here is true, we're trying to wake people up because there's going to be a deception that the Scriptures say is going to be so powerful that even the elect can be deceived by. I believe this is the elephant that I've wandered into kind of blindly in the jungle and doing my best to describe it. This disc has 50 hours worth of audio teaching on it. Most of it's mine, and I got a few others on there too. It's got 20 hours of video and a whole lot of other stuff on there. I wish I could give this stuff away for free. I really do. I'm doing these seminars and stuff for free, but we're basically just asking people to, if you believe in what we're talking about or in the mission that we have to try to get this out to people, we just ask that you support us. If we were in the desert trying to bring the message of Christ to people in the desert, would you give us a bottle of water for the day just to help us? That's essentially what we're asking for, $1 a day. $30 a month, $33 is a subscription package that we're putting together. And you can cancel at any time, or if all you want to do is a one-time contribution, we ask for a minimum of $50 to help us go to this convention that we're about to go to and some of the more traveling that we have to do. We also have other things, if that's a little bit too much for you. We have just the audio series of me reading the blogs. I've posted these online as blogs. I'm reading them, so if you can stand listening to me for like 20 hours, we have that for $15, honey, and a few other teachings for about the same amount of money. So just in closing, I want to show you something I think that it will encourage you. Regarding Zeus, remember Zeus, we talked about Zeus being the devil. There's a History Channel special that played recently, and I was amazed at what they said when they wrapped up the video about, there was a series called The Clash of the Gods, and I'll just let them, it's like a 2-minute video.
This is the story of Zeus, Greek mythology's supreme commander. To us, it's a myth, but to the ancients, it was reality. Some Greeks believed Zeus was the one true god, and that nature's worst catastrophes were a sign of his wrath. This is the myth of Zeus. In the myth, Zeus has held onto power in the face of strong opposition. But there is one more challenger he didn't count on. Jesus Christ. In the 1st century AD, his message would take the world by storm and dethrone Greece's dominant god.
In antiquity, there was no more powerful force than Zeus, except for one.
How awesome is that? On the History Channel. If you think about the significance of that, though, Zeus ruled the ancient world for 3,000 years. 3,000 years. Until a seemingly insignificant individual showed up from Nazareth that completely toppled his regime. When you look into all this stuff, it can become pretty scary. That gets me excited. What did Yeshua say? He came to destroy the works of the devil. Now you notice I keep saying Yeshua. Some of you here are from a Torah-based background. My wife and I just recently started taking Hebrew classes. We were taking Hebrew classes on Monday nights and basically looking at the scriptures from a Hebrew perspective. So I'm not part of the sacred name movement or any kind of Hebrew roots movement. I'm not part of any movement. I've just come to get a greater appreciation of what his name actually means, and I've simply chosen to call him by his given name. In Hebrew, it means salvation, but every Hebrew letter has multiple meanings. There's a Hebrew idiom that says every Hebrew letter has 7 meanings and every word has 70. And the reason they say that is because with the 7 meanings for each letter, whenever you take letters and make words, you can see how each word can have a multitude of meanings based on the letters that comprise the word. So if you look at this amazing word, salvation, Yeshua, the name of our Savior in Hebrew, reading from right to left, it means the hand that destroys the establishment of the eye. Our buddy Nimrod. He is the one that destroys the eye on the back of your dollar bill and everything associated with it. That's who we serve. That's what our TV series that we're working on is called Seed. Seed is a episodic TV series that we're putting together. It'll be very much like Lost or V or Battlestar Galactica or the X-Files or anything like that. But the idea is to take all this information, wrap it up into a science fiction framework so that we can deliver it to the world. Why? Because the world is not coming to the church. George Lucas made a statement that I believe is true. George Lucas said that the church, which used to be all-powerful, has been usurped by film. A Barna Group survey confirms that. A Barna Group survey says of the top 10 most influential factors in our culture, the top 3 were movies, television, and the internet. Church didn't even rank in the top 10. So if we're going to reach the world, we've got to go where the world is. Where's the world? Filling a parking lot of movie theaters and watching 4 to 5 hours of TV a day. But the thing is, they don't go to the movies and they don't watch episodic television to be preached to. They can serve to TBN if they want to get preached to. They watch episodic TV to be entertained. So the trick is putting all this into an allegorical format like Yeshua did, a parable, right? Culturally relevant stories that illustrate kingdom principles. And so that's what we're trying to do with Seed, the series. Thank you.